Hello, friends. Welcome to BNN with Bhante Suddhaso. This evening we will be talking about formlessness. But before that, we will be chanting the Ratana Sutta because we all need some blessings this 2020, full of turmoil and crazy stuff. And we need more happiness and peace in the world. So we're going to chant the Ratana Sutta. You can join us by clicking on the link on the live chat where you can find and then after that, Bhante will be leading us in meditation, and so we can cultivate some wisdom and some calm of mind. And after that, Bhante will be sharing some words of Dhamma, and if you have any questions, you can put them in the live chat. All right, thanks, Bhante.
So we'll start with the chanting. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Yani bhutani samagatani bummani vayani vantarike sabeva bhuta sumana bhavantu atopi sakacha sunantu bhasitam tasmani bhutani sameta sabbe metam karotamanusya pajaya divacharato chaharanti evalim tasmahine rakata pamata yam kinchivitam idavahuram vasagesu vayam ratanam panitam nano samamati tathagatena idampi buddhe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu kayam viragam mamatam panitam yada jagasakyamuni samahito natena dhammena samati kinchi idampi dhamme ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu yam buddha seto parivanayi suching samadhimana antarikanyamahu samadhina tena samona vijjati dampi dhamme ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu ye bhugala tasatam pasata chattari etani yugani honti te dakineya sugata sasavaka ete sudinnani mahapalani idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu ye supayuta manasa dalhena nikamino gotamasa sanamhi te patipata matam vigaiha ladha mudhani buddhim bunjamana idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu yatinna kilo patavim sito siya chatu bivate via sampakampiyo tatupamam sapurisam vadami yo arya sachani avecha pasati idampi sanghe ratanam panitam etena sachena suvati hotu ye arya sachani vibhavayanti gambhira panyena sudesitani Kinchapi te honti busapamata na te bhavana kamamadiyanti. Idampi sanghe ratanam panita metena sachena subhati hotu. Sahava sadasana sampadaya tayasu dhamma jahita bhavanti. Sakaya niti vichikichitancha silabatam vapiyadati kinchi. Chatuhapaye cha vipamuto chachavitanani ababbo katum. Idampi sanghe ratanam panita metena sachena suvati hotu. Kinchapi sokamam karoti papakam kayena vacha udachetasava. Ababbo sotassa patichadaya babbata ditapada savuta. Idampi sanghe ratanam panita metena sachena suvati hotu. Vanapagumbe yata pusita ge gimhanamase patamasmin gimhe. Tatupamam dhammavaram nadesayi nibbanagamim paramam hitaya. Vedampi buddhe ratanam panita metena sachena suvati hotu. Varo varanyu varado varavaro anuttaro dhammavaram nadesayi. Idampi buddhe ratanam panita metena sachena suvati hotu. Kinam puranam navam nati sambhavam virata chitta yatike pavasmi. Te kina bija virullichanda nibbanti dirayatayam padipo. Idampi sanghe ratanam panita metena sachena suvati hotu. Yani da bhutani samagatani bummani vayani vantalike. Tathagatam devamanusa pujitam buddham namassama subhati hotu. Yani da bhutani samagatani bummani vayani vantalike. Tathagatam devamanusa pujitam dhammam namassama subhati hotu. Yani da bhutani samagatani bummani vayani vantalike. Tathagatam devamanusa pujitam sangham namassama suvati hotu. Etena sacha vajjena dukkhavupasamintu te. Etena sacha vajjena bhayavupasamintu te. Etena sacha vajjena rogavupasamintu te.
Okay, so please get in a meditation posture, and we'll do some meditation practice. So taking the time to adjust your body into a very stable, steady position. It's better to take a few minutes now, settling the body properly, than to be fidgeting and squirming the whole time. So settling in. Take a few deep breaths. With each breath, releasing all the tension in the body and all the thoughts in the mind. Dropping all of your cares and concerns, all of your responsibilities and duties. Dropping anything you've been thinking about or worried about. Dropping anything you've been planning or considering. All of that can wait until later. So give yourself the next few minutes of meditation. Give yourself this as a time of serenity, a time of peacefulness, a vacation from your daily concerns. All of that can wait until later. And bring attention into your body. So feeling your body clearly, distinctly, intensely. So you have nothing to do except feel your body. Nothing to think about, nothing to reflect on. Your only task is to be clearly, intensely aware of your body. This one very important job, feeling your body. That's it. Like a guard, keeping very close watch. Trying not to miss even a single moment of bodily sensation. Stay focused. Now is not the time for thinking or planning. Now is just the time for feeling the body, knowing the body directly in each moment. Knowing each new moment just as it is in this body. And in the moments when the mind is fully focused on feeling the body, the moments when the mind is not doing anything else, notice how peaceful that feels. How peaceful it is when the mind is absorbed only in feeling the body. How joyful it is. How serene it is. How blissful. And in the moments when you get lost in thought, remember how blissful it was to just be focused on the body. Remember how peaceful it was. And bring the mind back to the body, dropping everything else, setting it aside, letting it wait until later. While for now, we just focus on feeling the body peacefully, blissfully, alertly, feeling the body. And when the mind is firmly settled in the body, notice that the sensations of the body are constantly changing. The edges and boundaries of the body are constantly changing. Everything within the domain of the body is unstable. Ephemeral, like a mirage, like an illusion. So remain clearly aware of the body and knowing that it is unstable, insubstantial, indeterminate, constantly changing. relax. Try to keep your mind peaceful. Don't go directly back in your old thought patterns. Let all of that wait for a time. Keep the mind still, alert, peaceful, and still. And start slowly moving your body. Do a little bit of stretching or massaging if you wish. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So the topic this evening is formlessness. And there's a certain amount of overlap between this topic and the subject of nibbana, which I spoke about a few days ago. And this also touches a bit on the concept of emptiness, as well as on the perception of impermanence. But the angle I particularly like to emphasize, or at least start off with emphasizing, is discussing what sankharas are. So that we can start to get some sense as to what we mean by forms. Before we can talk about formlessness, the absence of form, it's important to understand what form is, what we mean by that. So, for example, many people who are familiar with the Heart Sutra are aware of the line, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. But that's not actually exactly what we mean by form, because in that case, form is standing for the first of the five khandhas, as is clear later in the Heart Sutra where it mentions the other four khandhas. So in that case, form there is referring to body in particular. It's referring to physical form. But rather, when I talk about form, I'm referring to all forms, whether physical or mental. So not just physical form, not just body, not just material objects, but also mental objects, mental patterns, mental objects, which includes emotions, it includes tendencies of mind, it includes memories. All of this fits under forms. So a form then is any distinct object. Whether physical or non-physical is irrelevant. Any distinct object, anything that we can identify as being a distinct thing. So, for example, a book. A book is a form, a sankhara. So here I'm using the word form as synonymous to the word sankhara. So this is we would call this a book, and we would say that it is a distinct object, which is separate from the hand that's holding it. The book is separate from the air around it. The book is separate from the building it's in. The book is separate from the planet Earth, and so on. So you would say that the book is a separate object. It's a distinct form of its own. So that's a sankhara, a distinct object. A form that can be defined separately from other forms. Something that can be defined in terms of what it isn't. So a book is not a water bottle. So we have book, we have water bottle. So we say these are two distinctly different things. So one way that we define a form is in terms of what it isn't. Now, a book is not a water bottle. A book is not a stone. A book is not a chicken. A book is not a human. A book is not an emotion. A book is not a thought. A book is not anger. A book is not sadness. A book is a book. It can be defined in terms of which other forms it isn't. Forms can also be defined in terms of their components. So what is a book made up of? Well, you've got the cover, and you've got some pieces of paper in between the cover. You've got some glue and some thread, which are holding it all together. You have ink, which gives the cover its color and produces words on the inside and so on. So you can define a form then in terms of its component forms, what it's made up of. Which again, when we talk about the word saṅkhara, one of the literal meanings of the word saṅkhara is compounded, concocted, constructed. So saṅkhara comes from the prefix saṅ, which means together. It can also mean complete or entire, but one of its meanings is together. And kara means building or putting or making. So saṅkhara literally means putting together, constructing. So it's something, a saṅkhara is something that is put together from other things. And it's put together from other saṅkharas, by the way. It's elephants all the way down, as they say. So a saṅkhara is composed of other saṅkharas. It's defined as being made up of other saṅkharas, or defined in its relationship to other saṅkharas. Now, these are some of the ways we can talk about forms. One of the problems that we have with talking about forms is the more closely we look at it, the more arbitrary and meaningless it becomes. I'm going to get more into that in a minute, but first just to complete the picture of form. So form then also can include any kind of mental object, any kind of feeling, any kind of emotion, any kind of thought, any kind of perception, any kind of memory, any kind of idea. All of those things are forms because we can define them separately and distinctly. So we can define anger as being something distinct and separate from sadness, and distinct and separate from sight, and distinct and separate from pleasure, and distinct and separate from memory. So you can define mental forms just as we define physical forms in terms of what they aren't, in terms of the other mental forms that they aren't. And similarly, you can also define mental forms in terms of what they're made up of. So what is a memory made up of? It's made up of a lot of things, actually. It's made up of images, perhaps, sounds, perhaps, fragrances, perhaps. It might be made up of emotions and thoughts of its own. Sometimes there's even memories contained within memories, which gets quite messy. So, for example, one of my, I used to say my oldest memory was a memory of my 3rd birthday. But that was so long ago that now I think I'm actually remembering my memories of that memory. So I don't think I'm actually having a first-hand experience of that memory anymore. I think it's become second-hand or even third-hand or possibly more. And I've also noticed over the years that that memory has become both more sparsely detailed, but also more stylized, which also indicates how a memory of a memory of a memory, things start to distort, they start to shift and change. They start to take on almost a caricature of themselves. So this also points to another aspect of saṅkharas, another aspect of forms, which is that they're changing. They're continually changing. They're not stable. They're not reliable. They're not certain. They're not predictable. We can try to predict them, but they keep surprising us. So they're not reliable. They're not stable. They're not predictable. They're constantly changing. And sometimes they disappear altogether. And in fact, as we look more and more closely at our experience, we realize that forms are disappearing every moment. Actually, when we're paying close attention, we recognize that our entire experience, every single aspect of physical and mental experience, completely vanishes every single instant. All of it goes away every moment. Every single thing that we call body and mind vanishes every moment. Totally gone. And every moment, a completely new body and mind appears. How trippy is that? And most of the time, we don't even realize this is happening because we're not paying very close attention. One, we're not paying very close attention. And two, we believe the opposite. We believe that our body is a persistent, ongoing object, a persistent, ongoing form, which doesn't change very much or changes slowly. And similarly, we believe our mind is a persistent, ongoing thing, which doesn't change very much. Changes over time, maybe. But we also tend to believe that there's some deep bedrock aspects of mind which never change. Some deep bedrock things which have always been that way and will always be that way. This is all utter absurdity, of course. It's completely ridiculous. And the more closely and impartially we examine our experience moment by moment, the more clear it becomes that there is nothing in body or mind which persists, even for a moment. Sometimes in Buddhism, we say that things arise and then immediately cease. And sometimes we say that they arise and persist with alteration for a time and then cease. This sounds like two different statements, but they're actually exactly the same statement. Because persistence with alteration actually means that different things keep appearing each moment, but they're similar enough to each other that there's the illusion of persistence with alteration. So it's actually the same thing as saying that things appear and disappear every moment. And what's appearing in each new moment is not necessarily identical to what appeared in the previous moment. Sometimes, but usually not. Usually not. So this is what we call forms. What we call forms are the appearance of things which appear and then immediately disappear, moment by moment. And again, whether we call them physical or mental is actually completely beside the point. From a Buddhist standpoint, everything is mental. Everything is mind objects. There's nothing physical whatsoever. Or more accurate would be to say that it doesn't matter whether or not there's physical things because our experience is entirely mental. Entirely. So it actually becomes completely irrelevant whether or not there's any such thing as physical matter or physical objects or physical reality. It's completely irrelevant because we have never experienced it and we will never experience it. So it is completely beside the point. All of our experience is mental. So again, it doesn't matter whether we call objects physical or mental, they're all just forms that appear and disappear every moment. And even when we look closely at each moment, the more closely we look, the more clear it becomes that the boundaries and distinctions between forms is an arbitrary projection of our own mind. It's an arbitrary projection of our beliefs and expectations. One place where this gets really interesting. So during your meditation practice, try to get a clear sense of where the edge of your body is. Those who are used to me teaching the perception of impermanence know that there's a joke here. which is that you will never find it because it doesn't exist. What you'll actually eventually find is your belief that your body has an edge, but you will not find any evidence to support that belief. The more you look for the edge of your body, the more fuzzy and hazy and indistinct it becomes, because there's nothing to find. There's only an idea that the body has an edge. There's a belief that there's an edge to the body. But if you drop that belief and just pay close attention, you can't find an edge. So the more closely we look at form, the more closely we look at experience without expectation of particular forms, the more clear it becomes that forms are arbitrary. They're arbitrary concepts that we impose on reality. For example, you might believe that your body is separate from the cushion that you're sitting on. But is that true? So it's the belief that there is a form, which we call a body, and a form, which we call a cushion, and that they're somehow completely separate, distinct things. But is that true? Is that actually the reality? Is that really what's going on? Or is that just a belief? A belief which we hold to so tightly that it's what we experience. We'll try dropping the belief that body and cushion are separate objects and see what happens. What happens is that body and cushion are no longer experienced as separate objects. That's what happens. See for yourself. Advance warning, if your samadhi is weak and you haven't been practicing anicca sanya for years, this exercise may be challenging. So advance warning. So a lot of Buddhist mind experiments require a lot of preliminary practice and training. So this is one thing that I continually emphasize, that I feel needs to be continually emphasized, which is that without strong samadhi, you will never experience deep insight. With strong samadhi, deep insight is possible. Still not a guarantee, but it becomes accessible. Something that can be reached, something that can be felt. So without strong samadhi, odds are very unlikely that you will ever stop telling yourself the story that your body and the cushion are different objects. Without strong samadhi, you'll just keep persisting in that story and believing that story. Very unlikely that you'll be able to drop that belief even for a moment. Because that's the belief that we're used to. We're deeply wedded to this belief. We're stuck on it. Sometimes people temporarily break through it, more or less by accident, or sometimes by ingesting certain chemicals. But that never lasts for long, and it usually doesn't have a strong, lasting effect on a person. So that's not sufficient. Sometimes it's a little glimpse that we happen upon by accident, but it's not sufficient, because usually we just snap right back in our habitual belief patterns. Our belief that there are such things as persistent, ongoing forms which have reality of their own, and that we're just being aware of the real, persistent, genuine, solid forms which exist all by themselves. That's normally how we relate to the world. Again, utter delusion, utter absurdity. But we have to be willing to drop that belief before we can perceive anything else, before we can feel anything else, before we can experience the world in any other way. And we need to be willing to question that belief in the first place. We need to be willing to acknowledge in the first place that it's just a belief, that it's not reality, it's just a belief. We believe that reality is composed of distinct, separate objects which have real, ongoing existence of their own. We need to be willing to admit to ourselves that that's just a groundless belief, and it's not necessarily true. If we're willing to take that, then we can start to open up to another way of experiencing reality, which is formlessness. We can start to see what it feels like when we stop projecting forms onto formlessness. we can start to see what it feels like when we stop projecting sankharas, if you want to use Buddhist terminology, fancy technical terms. There's one monk I know who says, never talk Pali to me. Says, whenever people talk Pali to me, I start to get worried. And his point is that often people use Pali technical terms to try to cover up the fact that they don't know what they're talking about. So this is something we do need to watch out for. So again, what do we mean when we say sankharas? We see the world in terms of sankharas. Well, it means that we relate to the world as being composed of distinct, separate objects which have ongoing, persistent self-existence. That's what we mean. Try to relax that viewpoint and see what happens. So what you'll discover is that this viewpoint is an activity that we engage in moment by moment, which means it's something we can stop doing. So for example, in the meditation method called silent illumination, or shikantaza, one is stopping the activity of projecting forms upon the formless. One stops expecting the world to be composed of separate objects. One stops expecting there to be persistent, ongoing things. And when we stop projecting things, then there stops appearing things. When we stop projecting objects, there stops appearing objects. And the formless starts to become apparent. It's always been here. It's never been anywhere else. It's always been here. But we were so busy covering it up with forms projected from our own imagination that we were unable to see it. We were unable to be aware of the formless. It's always been here. It's never been anywhere else. It's always been right here. So when we start to drop forms, then we become aware of the underlying formlessness. And with this comes a sense of vast ease and spaciousness in the mind. So we talk about equanimity, this deep, unshakable serenity of mind. Well, when you recognize that there are absolutely no forms, then you also recognize that there's absolutely nothing to be bothered by. When you recognize that forms are a projection of your own delusional mind, then you stop taking them seriously. When you recognize that that person who said that annoying thing which is upsetting you so much is just a projection of your own delusional mind, then it's like, oh, oops, I guess I'll stop doing that. Then it stops being a problem, just like that. And spaciousness of mind, because we're no longer trapped within the little tiny fantasy that we've been living in all this time. We're no longer trapped in this little world of solid, unchanging things that we've convinced ourselves is real. We're no longer trapped within the solid walls of our prison cell that exists only in our own mind. We're no longer trapped in it. In truth, we never were trapped in it. We just convinced ourselves we were all this time. There's an interesting story of a Tibetan monk who, during the Chinese invasion of Tibet, he was put in prison because they put a lot of monks in prison. Monks were dangerous, after all. We might do terrible things like encourage people to be peaceful and wise. Very dangerous. So this monk was put in prison, like so many other Buddhist monks were in Tibet at the time, still are actually to this day. Lots of Buddhist monks in prison just for being Buddhist monks. He was put in prison, and then the next day, that morning, he wasn't in the prison cell, and the guards were like, "What's going on?" And the monk was out in the town square giving a Dhamma talk. And the monks were like, and the guards were like, okay, you need to get back in your cell. So they went out and they grabbed the monk and they brought him back and they put him in the cell. And then the next morning he was gone again, and he was out in the village giving a Dhamma talk. And again, the soldiers were baffled and brought the monk back to the cell. And the next day, once again, he was out in the village giving a Dhamma talk. And eventually the soldiers realized that the monk was just walking right through the wall of the prison cell. Because the monk, his own practice was advanced enough that he knew that wall was only solid if he believed it was solid. So there are genuine changes to how we relate to the world when we change our mind. So ultimately, though, we're not trying to learn how to walk through walls. That's just a side effect which we might sometimes come upon by accident. So I don't think this monk in particular was actually trying to develop that ability. He might have done it, but most likely he wasn't. But rather it's something which sometimes comes about as we develop our practice. So we're not trying to learn how to walk through walls. Rather, we're trying to recognize the delusions which we believe are real. And I'm going to let you in on a very unpleasant secret. It's unpleasant at first, but when we start to take it on, it becomes joyful. Every single thing that you think is real is a delusion projected by your own mind. All of it. Right now, I think I'm looking at an iPhone mounted on a tripod, but I'm not. That's just a delusion created by my own mind. It's just a fiction created by my own distorted patterns of thought. That's all. It's not real. It's happening. So it's not quite accurate to say it isn't real. There's clearly something happening, but it's not what it seems to be. It has no substance. It has no power, except the power that we give it. So through developing the perception of formlessness, learning how to drop forms, drop sankharas, we start to open up to the sense of vast, spacious okayness. The sense that no matter what happens, we'll be okay. The recognition that absolutely nothing and no one has the ability to harm us in any permanent way. All they can do is bring about a temporary change in an illusory form. And even that is only happening within our own delusional mind. So we don't need to take these things so seriously. Somebody insults us, oh well, big deal. Somebody slanders us, oh well, no big deal. You don't need to make a big deal out of these things. You don't need to make a problem out of them. We only react negatively to these things when we believe that they have actual, real, persistent, solid existence of their own. That's when we think these things have the ability to harm us. And it's also only when we think that there's a me that they can harm. What is it that others are attacking? They're attacking the five khandhas. They're attacking physical form, which actually is usually the only thing they can attack. Or they try to attack feeling, perception, mental objects, and consciousness. They try to, mostly through words. Words is the main way that people try to attack our mental components. They try. But what they're attacking is not us. It's not me. It's not mine. It's just temporary, illusory, changeable, insubstantial forms. things which have no substance of their own, things which have no reality of their own, and things which do not define us or control us, things which are not our true nature. So when somebody tries to attack us, that's kind of like they're shooting at the wrong target. They think they're attacking us, but they're actually attacking something that's not us. So once again, we don't need to be bothered by it. And the fact that somebody is even doing that simply indicates the depths of their own delusion, the depths of their own confusion and misunderstanding. So we can also feel compassion for them. It's like, oh, how sad. This person is so lost in their own delusions. Then not only do they think that they are a persistent ongoing entity attacking another persistent ongoing entity, but they actually think it's a good idea to attack another persistent ongoing entity. What an incredibly phenomenal amount of delusion. That person must be suffering so much. How sad. May they be free of that suffering. May they be free of that delusion. Nonetheless, we need to be willing to acknowledge where we are. We need to be willing to acknowledge our actual experience. Are there sankharas of sadness present? Are there sankharas of anger? Are there sankharas of despair? Are there sankharas of resentment? Are there sankharas of agitation? Is that happening? We need to be fully willing to admit to ourselves what's present in our experience. Then we can take the step of recognizing that those sankharas are, in fact, just sankharas. They're forms. They're things which have illusory appearance, but which do not control us, do not define us, and have no real substance of their own. They are projections of our own delusional mind. We don't need to take them seriously. We don't need to get caught up in them. We don't need to be controlled by them. So the perception of formlessness is something which is easiest to start with the body for most people, but it can and should be extended to include every aspect of mind. And then we can start to see how to be free of all forms. Free of the conditions of body and free of the conditions of mind. And freedom of the conditions of body and mind does not mean ignoring what's present. It means recognizing the illusory nature of what's present. Recognizing that in every moment we have a choice, whether to do what is wholesome or to do what is unwholesome, whether to fuel wholesome mind states or unwholesome mind states. We always have this choice. We're not stuck in any particular pattern. We're not stuck in any particular reaction. We're not stuck in any particular emotional state. We're not stuck in any particular mind state. Because none of these things are solid or persistent or substantial. So it's impossible to be stuck in them. There can only be the illusion of being stuck in them if we perceive them as real, persistent, solid, stable, confining, controlling. Then they control us. Then they confine us. But we always have the option to be free of them. And it comes in the shift of perception. The shift of perception from form to formlessness. So I think that's all I have to say. I think that's more than enough for one evening. I hope that this made at least a glimmer of sense to somebody other than me. So if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and enter them and I'll address them as best I can.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Gita had first of all a question on meditation. Do you want to address him? she's asking, when I focus on body, I feel thumping or pulsating in limbs, chest, and head. Is this common?
It can happen. I wouldn't worry about it. Be aware of it, but don't worry about it. Often what happens as we become more intensely aware of our body is we're becoming aware of sensations that have been going on for a long time, possibly even our whole life. And we were just never particularly aware of it. So for example, people, when they start to develop mindfulness of the body, they discover that they can feel their own heartbeat. They can feel their lungs expanding and contracting. They can feel the blood flowing in their veins. You can actually hear the blood rushing through the veins in your ears. You can smell the inside of your own nose. So sensations which have been here all along, but which we mostly don't pay any attention to or are unaware of, we start to become intensely aware of. And that can be a little unsettling at first, but eventually you just recognize that's just part of the package of a body, and it stops bothering you. Okay?
I think Gabriella asks, Bhante, when it comes to the dyadic relationship between form and formlessness, would you say that essentially perception is the distinction between the two?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, reality is what it is. So reality is simultaneously formlessness and also the entire infinite spectrum of form, simultaneously. That's what reality is. And then we look at it and we project whatever we want to see. So in that sense, yeah, it is perception. It's our own mental activity of projecting what we expect to see. So a classic example of this is when something comes into your peripheral vision. When something is on the periphery, we don't have a clear sight of it, so we often will project what we think it is. So an example of this is you might be sitting in the garden and you see a rabbit come into the edge of your vision. And then you turn and look and you realize, oh, it wasn't a rabbit after all. It was something else, maybe a leaf blowing by or a tennis ball or whatever. But at first we believed it was a rabbit, so we projected the image of a rabbit onto our field of view. So this can be actually quite shocking sometimes. We think we see something and we turn and we look and we realize it's not what we thought. This is actually happening all the time, continuously in our entire field of perception. It's not just on the periphery of our field of view. It's happening all the time. Okay.
And good to see you, Michael. Michael asks, hello, Bhante. Well, is formlessness a gateway to what Advaita Vedanta calls non-duality?
So I have to be honest, I'm not tremendously familiar with Advaita Vedanta. I've looked at it a little bit, mainly just because a lot of people draw parallels between Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism. And actually, one of the best theories I've seen about this points to the fact that Advaita Vedanta is a relatively new development in Hinduism that arose hundreds and hundreds of years after Buddhism. And that Advaita Vedanta was an attempt to integrate Buddhist philosophy back into Hinduism. So that this is why Advaita Vedanta seems to have so much similarity to Buddhist philosophy, is because it actually is a synthesis of elements of Buddhism with elements of Hinduism. This makes tremendous sense to me. So it's not surprising that one will find things in Advaita Vedanta that closely resemble Buddhism. But my understanding is that Advaita Vedanta still runs into one basic conflict with Buddhism, is that Advaita Vedanta still upholds the doctrine of soul, the doctrine of an eternal soul. So that runs afoul of Buddhism. That presents issues. And also it breaks the idea of non-dualism. Runs into a fundamental problem there. But yeah, I have heard it said that Advaita Vedanta is the branch of Hinduism which comes the closest to Buddhism, but that it falls a little bit short because it does still rest on the idea of soul.
And Gabriela asks, should we actively pursue formless jhana because I have a bit of concern that it will lead to formless rebirth? And doesn't that mean we can't hear Dhamma and can't advance and burn our good karma and burn the merit and end up straight in hell?
So Gabriela, I'm going to let you in on something which you probably already are well aware of, which is that you've been through hell many, many times and you got through it okay. It sucked, but eventually you got to the end of it and then you wound up somewhere nicer. You've also been through the formless heavens many times. It was great. And eventually you got to the end of it and wound up somewhere else. So just accept the fact that you've been to these realms many, many times already, and that there's a decent chance you're going to wind up in them again, unless you attain enlightenment sometime soon, which I hope you do. Keep working on it. What was the other part of your question?
Going to hell, wait.
Oh, wait. So yeah, as for formless jhanas, I'm not actually recommending practicing the formless jhanas. So the formless jhanas are arupa jhana, which means non-physical. That's not the way I was using the word formless. I hope I clarified that sufficiently in the talk. I was using the word formless to mean asaṅkhata. Since you know Pali, you should know immediately what I mean. Asaṅkhata. That's what I was using the word formless to mean, not arupa. Okay? So the arupa jhanas would still be saṅkhata. They would not be asaṅkhata. They're not formless. They're non-physical, but not formless.
Gabriela says, I don't want to go there again, to hell.
That's good. Then work on attaining stream entry. Then you won't go to hell anymore. Or the 8th Bodhisattva Bhumi. That would also work. Unless you've taken the Jizo vow. If you take the Jizo vow, then you'll be spending a lot of time in the hell realms. But you'll be doing it intentionally and out of compassion. So that makes it a lot more tolerable. Ayasoma is making dramatic expressions of distaste at the idea of the Jizo vow, even though she's already taken it. So we actually sometimes joke that living in America is clear proof that we've taken the Jizo vow in the past.
Oh, for real. And Gita says, is sunyata related to formlessness?
Yeah.
And Ishan says, Bhante, all forms, all khandhas arise and fall. So what arises and falls does not exist. That's why it's all the delusion that projects. And when we associate with forms, that's the rise of suffering.
That's pretty close, but I would just clarify, rather than say that they do not exist, instead I would say they do not absolutely exist. It's not accurate to say that they don't exist, because clearly there's something happening. There is the experience of forms. So that's why it's not accurate to say that they don't exist. However, those forms exist only as illusory appearances within a delusional mind, which is why it's not accurate to say that they exist either. So we cannot define them as either existing or not existing. The Buddha is very clear on this in several suttas. Most notably the Kachanagota Sutta, but also several others. He points to this. We cannot define anything as either existing or not existing. Neither statement is correct. Or we could say both statements are correct from their own side.
Right, and Kevin says, can you say a bit more on how every moment is a new, different form? You use the body example. Could you expand on that a bit, please?
Yeah, pay attention to your experience and you'll see. Technically, every moment, a whole new set of sensations appear. They're not continuations of the previous things. It's a whole new set. Much of it resembles what was present in the previous moment, but it's not identical. And it's not the same thing. It's a new thing. The mere fact that it's in a new moment already means it's a new thing. But also, as you pay close attention, you'll notice there are subtle variations in what appears moment by moment, even in things that we believe are stable. And also keep in mind, what we're talking about is always, always, always a mental experience. What we're talking about is always in the mind. Even what we call the body is just something that exists within the mind. And if you look, you'll see it's different moment by moment. And the mere fact that it has different things surrounding it means that it is itself different. Remember that every saṅkhara is defined in terms of its relationship to other saṅkharas. So when the surrounding saṅkharas change, then that means that the first saṅkhara is also by definition different.
And Ishan says, thank you, Bhante. Can you please say the name of the sutta again?
Kachana Gota, Samyutta Nikaya 12.15.
I'll write it down. What number was?
12.15.
12.15.
Yeah, SN 12.15.
Right, and that was the last question, or maybe not. Kevin says, okay, but if I walk out and get hit by a bus, that seems to be two forms colliding, one being my body, which then perishes. This one is hard to get my mind around.
Well, that's called being stuck in emptiness. So when somebody thinks, well, all forms are illusory, so it doesn't matter if I walk in front of a bus, that's called being stuck in emptiness, which means that they are disregarding the appearance of forms. So that's just a more subtle form of delusion, because forms still have apparent existence, and until we are free of all forms, we do need to be careful. Because the realities that we construct for ourselves can either lead closer to enlightenment or further away from it. And getting hit by a bus usually is not considered a part of the path to awakening. So we do want to avoid the getting hit by a bus part of illusory form. Even though it's illusory, it is not going to be productive in letting go of all forms. Okay. Riley has a question.
Just a comment. It made me think of something. Like while you were talking about, it's not quite accurate to say that something doesn't exist. It made me think of like fiction, like works of fiction. So like they're not true in the sense that it's not stuff that's actually happening, but you still like watching a movie, you might still get angry or cry, or it might still like affect you in some way. So, you know, it's not real, and it also isn't real per se, but there's some experience.
Yeah, that's a good example. That's kind of the mind of a Buddhist practitioner who's not yet attained stream entry. We're like someone, we're starting to figure out that all of this is kind of like this weird fiction story that we're writing for ourselves, and we're apparently a little bit masochistic because it kind of sucks. But even though we know it's not quite real, we take it very seriously and we keep reacting emotionally to it.
So much dukkha.
Exactly. Remember, all dukkha is created by the mind. We're doing it to ourselves.
And Mark says, did the Buddha differentiate between physical brain and mind, that is, the brain makes the mind, compared to some traditions that believe the mind persists after the death of the brain?
The mind has nothing whatsoever to do with the brain. In Buddhism, this is quite clear. The mind is the mind. The body is the body. The brain is part of the body. The brain is not the mind. One way you might look at it is that the brain is the way that the brain is the medium which the mind uses to interact with the body. Which is why if the brain is damaged, then the mind tends to have a harder time interacting with the body effectively. This is just a way of talking. It's not necessarily meant to be absolutely true, but it's one way of starting to relate to this. But yeah, definitely in Buddhism, the brain is not the mind. The mind is not the brain. Yeah.
And Yan says, getting hit by a bus is not part of the path. Duly noted.
Yes.
Unless you take the busso vow, like the jizzo vow and the busso.
Now, that would be strange. So the Avatamsaka Sutra does list lots and lots and lots of bodhisattvas and the different vows they took. I don't remember one of them being the get hit by the bus bodhisattva. Theoretically possible, but I'm not really sure how that would help anyone.
Not very useful.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, the unknowable one-fold path. Not to be walked.
Yeah.
All right. So with that in mind, let's remember the Noble Eightfold Path that, on the other hand, brings to awakening and freedom from suffering. And with that in mind, we can end the evening tonight. So just a reminder that tomorrow we will be meeting in the morning and in the evening, but it will be the last day of the live streams for this week, and then we'll resume next week, every week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So you can tune in on the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. New York City time, and we'll be here sharing them as usual, but it will be slightly different than usual. All right. Well, have a great and sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.